Get out. That was what the store staff said, not quietly, not politely. He said it the way people say things when they have decided someone does not deserve respect. And then, he grabbed her. An old woman. Gray hair. Small frame. A little basket of groceries in her hand. He grabbed her arm and dragged her toward the door like she was something to be removed. The whole store went silent. People were watching, standing right there with their shopping baskets and their full view of everything happening. Nobody moved. Nobody said a single word, except one person. She was a maid. She had every reason to keep her head down and mind her business. She did not keep her head down. She walked straight across that store and stood between that old woman and the man dragging her. What happened after that changed her life completely. Before we go any further, if you are watching this for the first time, welcome. This channel is where love finds people who were never supposed to meet. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. And if you have been here before, you already know what is coming. Let us get into it. Her name was Pamila Adeyemi. She was 26 years old, Nigerian-born. She had been in South Korea for 18 months, and in all that time she had followed one rule above every other. Stay invisible. Not because she was afraid. Because she was smart. She had learned, in the factory in Incheon where she worked her first year, that the safest version of herself was the version nobody noticed. Head down, work done, money sent home, repeat. The factory was brutal. Cold floors, long hours, supervisors who didn't learn her name for 6 months. But she had survived it. She had sent money to her mother in Lagos every single month without fail, even in the months when it meant she skipped meals. So when the placement agency offered her a new job, live-in maid, private residence, 3 times the factory salary, she asked very few questions. The money was real. The contract was signed. That was enough. What she did not ask was whose house it was. The house sat at the end of a road most people drove past without slowing down. 4 stories of dark glass and gray stone. Iron gates with black spikes. Security cameras covering every corner, every angle. Not a single blind spot in the entire grounds. 2 men in black suits at the gate. Always. Not moving. Not talking. Just standing, in the way that tells you everything without saying anything. Inside, the floors were white marble polished to a mirror. The orchids in the crystal vases were replaced every 3 days. The air smelled of a fragrance pumped through the climate system that cost more per liter than most people earned in a week. Pamila had been standing in the entrance hall of this place for exactly 1 hour when the head maid finally looked up from her clipboard. Her name was Mrs. Cho. She was a woman in her late 50s who moved through that house like she had been manufactured for it. Every step exact. Every word measured. She looked at Pamila the way you look at something you need to decide the value of. You are the new one, she said. Not a greeting. Not even really a sentence. Just a fact being confirmed. Pamila Adeyemi, Pamila said. Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Cho looked her over slowly. Then she held up her clipboard. Tell me the rules. Pamila did not hesitate. I don't ask questions about the owner or his business. I don't speak to guests unless they speak first. I don't go to the 3rd or 4th floor without specific instruction. I don't use my phone in common areas. I don't discuss this house with anyone outside it. Mrs. Cho gave one small nod, the smallest possible version of approval. And the most important rule, she said, you are invisible. You are part of the furniture. The owner doesn't see you. The guests don't notice you. You work, you leave on your days off, and you come back. She paused. Can you do that? Yes, ma'am, Pamila said. And for 2 weeks, she did exactly that. She learned the house the way you learn a language you have no choice but to learn. She learned which hallways were hers. She learned Mr. Park's kitchen. The head chef, a man who treated cooking the way a surgeon treats surgery, with precision, silence, and very high standards for everyone around him. She learned Mrs. Cho's folding system for the linen. She learned the schedule, the rhythms, the unspoken rules underneath the written ones. She saw the owner exactly once, from a distance. She had been carrying fresh linen down the 2nd floor corridor when she heard footsteps on the marble below Sue. Unhurried. Heavy. The footsteps of someone who had never needed to rush in his life. She looked down from the top of the stairs. Tall, broad shoulders, dark suit, black hair, a face that was sharp and still in the way that very powerful things are still. He crossed the hall without looking up. She pressed herself against the wall and waited until he was gone. She did not ask his name. She was invisible. She planned to stay that way. That plan lasted exactly 2 weeks. On a Tuesday morning, Mrs. Cho found her in the linen room. Pamila, Amart, Yangwaro. Grocery list and cash in the envelope. Back in 2 hours. She handed over both items without making eye contact. Side gate. Driver is waiting. The driver did not speak. He dropped her at the market entrance, told her he'd wait on the side street, and that was the full extent of their conversation. Pamila, went inside. Mapo Mart was a real market. Not the polished kind near tourist areas. The real kind. Ajusmas in padded vests squeezing fruit. Men in work boots pushing loaded trolleys. Kids running between the aisles, while their mothers called after them without looking up. It smelled of fresh vegetables and baking bread, and something faintly sweet from the confectionery aisle. For a moment, standing in the entrance with her list in hand, Pamila felt something she hadn't felt in 18 months. Normal, just normal. She moved through the aisles. Sweet soy sauce, sesame oil, 3 types of mushroom, fresh ginger, spring onions. She was in the produce section, holding a bundle of perilla leaves up to the light to check their freshness, when she heard it. A shout. "Yeah, get out." I said get out of the store. She looked up. Near the exit, close to the checkout counters, a young store employee had his hand wrapped around the arm of an old woman. The woman was small, silver white hair, a plain coat, neat and clean, not expensive. A little basket of groceries hanging from her other arm. Barley tea, dried jujubes, rice crackers, sesame sweets. Maybe 6 items in total. The employee was maybe 22, 23. His face was red and self-important. He had the look of someone who had been given a very small amount of authority and had made a very large decision about what it meant. He was not holding the old woman. He was gripping her. "I was not stealing," the old woman said. Her voice was thin but steady. "I was going to pay. I just realized I left my. You were walking out." He tightened his grip. "I saw you. I was going to the door to call my driver. Stop making excuses." He started pulling her toward the exit, not gently. "Every time with people like you. You are hurting me," the old woman said, quietly, almost to herself. "Please. You are hurting me." He did not let go. Pamila looked around the store. 15 people, maybe more, all within clear sight of what was happening. A middle-aged man near the bread, who had turned his back. A young couple frozen with their basket between them. 2 women in the next aisle whispering to each other. One of them holding her phone. Not to call anyone, just to hold. Not one of them moved. The old woman said it again. "Please, you are hurting me." Pamila put the perilla leaves down on the shelf. She walked. She crossed the produce section, moved past the bread aisle, and stopped 2 steps from the employee. Close enough that he had to look at her. Far enough that she hadn't crossed into his space yet. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice did not shake. It was not loud. It was simply the voice of someone who had already decided. The employee looked at her. She watched it happen in real time. He took in a black woman, foreign, in practical work clothing with an empty basket. He dismissed her in under 2 seconds. "This doesn't concern you," he said. "Move along." "It does concern me," Pamila said. She looked at his hand, then she looked at his face. "You're hurting her. Let her go." She was shoplifting. She wasn't. She kept her voice exactly level. "I was watching from the produce section. She wasn't running." She had her basket in her hand. "If you believed she was leaving without paying, you walk up to her and ask her to come to the checkout. You don't grab her arm." She looked at his hand again. "I won't ask you again." Something shifted, not conscience. More like the awareness that the audience around him was watching differently now. That the people who had been looking away were looking at him. He let go. The old woman straightened immediately. She pulled her sleeve down over her wrist, slowly, deliberately, and lifted her chin. A woman reclaiming something that should never have been taken. Pamila looked at her. "Are you all right?" "Yes." The woman's voice was steadier than it had any right to be. Thank you, my dear. What happened? I came in for a few small things. She held up the basket. I only realized at the exit that my handbag was in the car. My driver had already left. I was going to the door to call him. She looked at the employee with calm, clear eyes. I was not stealing. I have never stolen anything in my life. The employee's ears had gone dark red. How much are the items? Pamila asked. The old woman blinked. No, please. How much are the items? She placed the basket on the nearest checkout belt. 7,201. She counted it from the small personal cash in her jacket pocket, placed it on the counter without looking at the employee, and handed the bagged items to the old woman. The old woman took the bag in both hands. She stood there for a moment, holding it, looking at Pamila with eyes that had gone very bright. You didn't have to do that, she said softly. I know, Pamila said. I wanted to. The old woman was quiet. She looked at Pamila carefully. The way people look when they are trying to understand something they didn't expect to feel. What is your name? Pamila. Pamila. She said it slowly, like she was placing it somewhere she would not lose it. I am Han Sun-yi. You may call me Madam Han. She paused. I don't often meet people with a heart like yours. There are more than you think, Pamila said. Madam Han smiled. A full, warm, real smile that reached hers and stayed there. Thank you, she said. I will not forget you. She tucked the bag under her arm and walked out of the store. Straight-backed. Unhurried. Like a woman who had just proven something about herself, rather than lost something. Pamila watched her go. Then she went back to the produce section, picked up the perilla leaves she had left on the shelf, finished the grocery list, and returned to the car. She told herself she had already stopped thinking about the old woman. She hadn't, but she had no way to know that it didn't matter. Because the old woman had not stopped thinking about her either. She got back to the compound 7 minutes inside the 2-hour window. She handed the bags to Mr. Park, removed her coat, and was reaching for her apron when Mrs. Cho appeared in the kitchen doorway. Pamila. Yes, ma'am. Everything on the list. Good. Front parlor. Now. Something in Mrs. Cho's voice was different. Still precise, but underneath it, careful, like she was carrying something fragile. Celadon tea set. Not the everyday one. Persimmon cookies, the blue tin. Arrange it properly. You're attending the master's mother. Pamila went still. The master's mother, she repeated. She arrived 20 minutes ago. You serve her tea and attend to whatever she needs. Mrs. Cho looked at her directly. Be correct, Pamila. Be attentive. Do not make conversation unless she invites it. Yes, ma'am. She found the Celadon tea set in the glass dining cabinet. Pale green and delicate, the kind of thing that told you whatever was being served in it mattered. She brewed the premium Omija tea. The one she'd been told was never ordinary occasions. And arranged the persimmon cookies on a small lacquered plate. She checked the flowers in the parlor. Peonies, freshly replaced, fine. She balanced the tray in both hands and pushed open the parlor door. She had never been in the front parlor before. It was warmer than the rest of the house. Smaller too, and that made it feel human in a way the rest of the compound never did. Pale wood paneling on the walls. Low golden light. 2 deep armchairs on either side of a low table. A large window looking out onto a private garden where a persimmon tree stood in the late morning light, its leaves just beginning to turn. And in one of the armchairs, coat folded neatly over the arm, posture straight, hands resting gently in her lap, was Madam Han. Pamila stopped in the doorway. For one suspended moment, neither of them moved. The old woman from the grocery store was sitting in the front parlor of the house Pamila worked in. Then Madam Han turned. She looked at Pamila's face. Pamila looked at hers. And then, softly, with a warmth that had no performance in it, the old woman smiled. Well, she said, the world is smaller than it looks. Pamila crossed the room carefully. Tray steady. Hands steady. She poured the tea without shaking and arranged the cookies, without looking up. Because she needed a moment to put herself back together. I didn't know who you were, she said quietly. At the store. I'm sorry, of course you didn't. Madam Han waved her hand gently. How could you? Sit down for a moment, child. Madam, I should. I know what you are. Her voice was simple and direct. I'm asking you to sit down anyway. Pamila sat. Madame Han looked at her. Unhurried, completely present, the way some older people look at you when they have decided to actually see you rather than simply observe you. Are you all right? She asked. Not, is the tea correct? Not, did you follow instructions? Not, anything about the house at all. Are you all right? Something shifted in Pamila's chest. Small, but real. Yes, madam, she said. I'm fine. You sound like someone who says that a great deal, Madame Han said, with the slightest smile. She lifted her teacup in both hands. The old way, the respectful way, and breathed in the steam. Then she told Pamila exactly what had happened that morning. The forgotten handbag. The driver already gone. Walking to the store door to call him. Not making it. Nobody helped me, she said. Not as a complaint, as a fact. Delivered plainly. Which somehow made it worse. There were many people in that store. He was hurting my arm and I was asking him to stop. She paused. And then you came. Pamila said nothing. You are not Korean, Madame Han said. No, madam, Nigerian. And you spoke Korean to him. I've been here 18 months. That isn't long. I learn quickly. Here is what Pamila did not know in that moment. This old woman was already deciding something. Something that had nothing to do with tea or gratitude, or a 7,001 debt. He dismissed you before you had finished your first sentence, Madame Hans said. I saw his face. He decided you weren't worth listening to before you had said a word. She paused. And you spoke anyway. He was hurting someone who had done nothing wrong, Pamila said simply. I was there. I couldn't walk past. Madame Han was quiet. She looked out at the garden, where the persimmon tree moved gently in a breath of wind. You paid for my groceries, she said. It was a small amount. The amount is not the point. Her voice was firm, warm and certain at the same time. You gave it without asking if I would you back, without knowing who I was, without expecting anything at all. She looked at Pamila directly. That is rarer than it should be. Pamila didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. And Madame Han, as though understanding perfectly, lifted her tea again and said, Tell me about Nigeria. Tell me about home. And Pamila, who was paid to be invisible, who hadn't told anyone in this city anything real about to herself, who had been a face without a story for 18 months, looked at this woman who was looking back at her like she was a person worth knowing. And she talked. She talked about Lagos on a Saturday morning, when the city is loud and alive and bright before the heat sets in. About her mother's kitchens and the smell of a goosey soup that meant Sunday. About the sound of rain on a tin roof in her grandmother's village, and the specific golden haze of Harmattan light that didn't exist anywhere else on Earth. Madame Han listened. Not the polite, distant kind of listening. Real listening. The kind where the person in front of you is the only thing happening. When Pamila stopped, Madame Han said quietly, Your mother must miss you very much. Sheet. I send money home every month, but it's not the same. No, the old woman said. It never is. 3 floors above them, in an office the size of most people's apartments, with tinted windows and no nameplate on the door, a man was reading a contract when Mrs. Cho knocked. His name was Han Tae-jin. Not many people in Seoul said that name casually. People who knew it used it carefully. He was 38 years old. He had been running the Han network, real estate, imports, logistics on the surface, and something considerably less clean underneath. Since the age of 30, when his father died. And left everything behind, and everyone waited to see who would step into the silence. Han Tae-jin had stepped into it. He was not a man people described as warm. He was precise, controlled. He kept his word with an absoluteness that people who dealt with him had learned to rely on. He had built something formidable and cold, and he maintained it carefully. There was exactly one exception to his coldness, one person in the world to whom the armor simply did not apply. His mother. He had tried once, at 22, to extend the coldness to her as well. She had looked at him and said without raising her voice, You may decide to be that way with everyone else. You will not practice it on me. He hadn't tried again. He put down his contract when Mrs. Cho knocked, straightened his jacket, went downstairs. He heard her before he reached the parlor door. She was laughing. A real laugh, relaxed and full, the kind she made when she was completely comfortable. He stopped in the hallway and listened. She was talking about food. Specifically, a pepper soup she'd eaten in Abuja 30 years ago, a city she'd visited exactly once. He looked through the open doorway. His mother was sitting in her chair. Across from her, in the other armchair, was someone he didn't recognize. Staff clothing. A young woman. She was leaning slightly forward, both hands in her lap. She was listening to his mother like she was the most interesting person in the room. He stood in the doorway and watched for a moment. When had someone last listened to his mother like that? He stepped inside. Both women looked up. The young woman stood immediately. Her expression shifted, the appropriate neutral returning fast. But not before he caught something underneath it. Not fear. He was used to fear. People defaulted to some version of it when he entered a room. This was different. Steadier. The look of someone who was deciding what kind of person he was before deciding what to think of him. He found that interesting. He went to his mother and bent to press a kiss to the top of her head. Her hand came up and held his for a moment, the way it always did. Hello, and I see you, and I'm glad, all at once in one gesture. You look tired, she said. I'm fine. You always say that. She looked up at him. Sit. He sat. The young woman poured a fresh cup of tea and placed it in front of him with both hands, correctly, quietly, and stepped back. Leave us, please, he said. Wait, his mother said. He looked at her. She was looking at the young woman, and she was smiling the smile she reserved for things she genuinely cared about. Pamila, she said warmly. Thank you for the tea. Thank you for talking with me. She paused. I hope we speak again. The young woman, Pamila, looked at his mother and said, without any performance in it, I would like that very much, Madam Han. Then she picked up her tray and left. Han Tae-chin watched her go. Then he looked at his mother. Who is she? New staff. 2 weeks. Madam Han picked up her tea. She's the one I'm going to tell you about. She told him the whole story. Simply, directly, the way she always told things. The forgotten handbag. The store employee. His hand on her arm. The crowd that stood and watched without moving. He grabbed you, Han Tae-jin said. His voice had gone very quiet. Tae-jin, in a public store. He put his hands on you. That is not the point of the story. The point, his mother said firmly, is the girl. She set down her cup. She didn't know who I was. She was there to buy groceries, and she saw an old woman being humiliated, and everyone around her kept walking. She didn't. Her voice softened. She stood in front of that man, and she made him let me go. And then she paid for my groceries with her own money, without asking, without expecting anything back, without knowing if I could even repay her. She met his eyes. Do you understand what I'm telling you? He was looking at the doorway where Pamila had stood. She didn't know who you were, he said. That, his mother said quietly, is exactly the point. Silence settled between them. He looked down at his hands. What do you want me to do? He asked. See her. His mother said. That's all. She's in your house. She's alone in a country that has been, by the sound of it, mostly unkind to her. She spent money she couldn't afford on a stranger. She put her hand over his. See her the way she saw me. Just that. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Mapo Mart on Yanghua Road. Tae-jin, I'm not going to have anyone hurt, he said, the slightest edge of impatience in his voice. I'm going to have him fired. He put his hands on you. That has a consequence. His mother looked at him for a long moment. Then she sighed. The sigh of a woman who has made peace with the fact that her son is complicated. Fine, she said, but that is not the point. I know it's not the point, he said. But it's also a point. And then something happened that happened rarely in that house. Han Tae-jin smiled. Brief, but real. His mother shook her head slowly, something between exasperation and love, and reached for her tea. 4 days later, there was an envelope on Pamila's breakfast tray. No crest, no seal. Her name written in Korean, that was precise but careful. The handwriting of someone who didn't write Korean every day, but had made absolutely sure this would be correct. She opened it, a cream card, simple, and on it, in that same careful hand, 7,001. Return this at your convenience. Han Sun-yi. Inside the card, 2 crisp 50,001 notes. Pamila sat down on the edge of her bed. She stared at the card. Then she started to laugh. soft and helpless, pressed into the back of her hand. 100,001 for a debt of 7,000. The woman had returned 14 times the amount owed, wrapped in the language of a formal transaction. Proud enough to insist on repaying every coin, dignified enough to do it without making it feel like charity. She got out her paper and pen and wrote back. Madam Han, you don't need to repay me, and this amounts too much. I didn't give you money expecting to get it back. I gave it because I wanted to, and a gift given freely isn't a debt. But I think you're someone who can't accept what feels like a burden on another person. So I'll say this. The way you spoke to me in the parlor, the way you asked about my home and actually listened, was worth more to me than any number. If there's a debt between us, you paid it that afternoon. With respect and gratitude, Pamila Adeyemi. She sealed it and found Ji Young in the hallway. Ji Young was one of the other maids. 4 years at the compound. The only staff member who said Pamila's jeans like she'd actually learned it. Ji Young looked at the sealed envelope. Then she looked at Pamila. You're writing to the master's mother? She wrote to me first. Ji Young turned the envelope over slowly, like it was heavier than it looked. Then she looked at Pamila with an expression that was somewhere between wonder and concerns. I'll make sure she gets it, she said. Madame Han received the letter that evening in her sitting room in Seongbukdong, a room full of books with cracked and healed spines, photographs she dusted herself, 2 armchairs by the window that had held the comfortable shape of 40 years of use. She read it twice. She folded it and held it against her chest and didn't move for a moment. Then, she called her son. He answered on the second ring. She said, Madame Han began, without any preamble, that me speaking to her as though she were a person worth talking to was worth more than the money she spent. Her voice went very quiet. Taejin. She said that as though it was the most remarkable thing that had happened to her. She paused. What does that tell you about how she has been treated here? Silence on the line. I'm not assigning blame, she said. I'm telling you because I need you to understand what I'm asking. I want her to know she is seen, that is all. She looked at the folded letter in her hand. Will you do that? A long pause. All right, he said. Just that word. But she had known him his whole life. She knew what that word meant when he said it that way. Keep the letter, he said. She looked at it in her hand. I intend to. The change in the compound was subtle. But it was real. Mrs. Cho began putting Pamila on tasks that required trust. Not dramatically. No announcements, no explanations. But the assignments shifted. The reading room. The table settings for formal dinners. The small, quiet presence required when certain visitors arrived. Mr. Park stopped treating Pamila like part of the background. He asked her one evening if she knew how to make Nigerian jollof rice, and spent 20 minutes listening to her explain the tomato base with the focus of a man categorizing information he planned to use. Ji Young started knocking on her door in the evenings, bringing whatever biscuits she could find, talking about nothing that mattered until it became something that did. The house was becoming, slowly and without ceremony, something she might dare to call familiar. And then one Wednesday, Han Tae-jin passed her in the second-floor corridor. She was carrying freshly ironed table linen. He was coming from the direction of his office. She pressed herself to the wall the way she always did, looked down, waited for him to pass. He slowed. She looked up. He stopped. Adeyemi, he said. Her name. He said her name. She hadn't been certain, until that moment, that he knew it. Yes, sir. He looked at her for a moment. Not the slow top-to-bottom assessment of Mrs. Cho. Something more particular. Is the work manageable here? He said. Are you settled? She stared at him. In every job she had held in Korea, not once had the person, who owned the house, asked her whether the work was manageable. Yes, sir, she said carefully. Thank you for asking. He nodded. A pause. Something being considered. If you have concerns, bring them to Mrs. Cho, or directly to me. Directly to you, she repeated. Yes. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. But in that direction, you seem like someone who says what she means. And then, he continued walking. Pamila stood in the corridor for 30 full seconds before she remembered she'd been going somewhere. 3 weeks later, he appeared in the kitchen at midnight. She had been standing at the stove, watching the water heat for chamomile tea. The low lights were on. The oven sat at minimum warmth, the way Mr. Park kept it overnight. Outside, Soul hummed distantly through the thick glass. She heard the door. She turned. Han Tae-jin was standing in the kitchen doorway. No jacket. Shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow. Nothing in his hands. He looked. In that kitchen light, so completely like a regular person that it took her a full second to adjust. He looked mildly surprised to see her too. "You make tea at this hour?" he said. "It helps me sleep." She kept her voice even. "I can leave." "Don't." He came into the kitchen. He found a glass, filled it with cold water from the tap, and sat down at the small staff table like he sat there every night. "Continue." She turned back to the pot. The water was just beginning to move. The kitchen was warm. Outside, a siren passed somewhere far off and faded. "Does Nigeria feel far?" he asked. A real question. Not small talk. "Yes and no," she said. "I carry it with me. But on quiet nights, yes." "How long have you been sending money home?" 18 months. Every month. "Do you keep any for yourself?" "Enough," she said. Which was not quite the same thing. He didn't push it. She noticed that. He knew where the edge of a question was. She poured her tea. And because the midnight kitchen made formality feel absurd, she carried her cup to the table and sat across from him. He didn't comment. "Can I ask you something?" she said. He looked at her. A very slight shift, the quiet surprise of someone who wasn't often asked before being asked. "Yes," he said. "What did you want to be before you became this?" He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that she thought she'd crossed a line. Then, "Marine biologist." She stared. "I was 12, he said. "My father bought me a book about deep-sea creatures. The ones at the bottom where no light reaches, anglerfish, giant squid, bioluminescent jellyfish." He looked at the table. "I read it until the spine broke and the pages came loose. I kept them in a folder." She was watching him fully now, forgetting to be careful about it. "What happened?" she asked. He looked up, looked at her. Life made other decisions. She looked at him, the whole shape of him, not just the surface, the controlled face, the rolled-up sleeves. The glass of water he was turning slowly on the table. A man who had buried a 12-year-old's wonder so deep that most people would never know it, had existed. "The ocean is still there," she said. He looked at her sharply. "It didn't go anywhere," she said. "The anglerfish are still down there. Whatever you are now, that part of you didn't stop being real." She paused. "Maybe that matters." He was very still. She had said too much. She knew she had. "My mother likes you very much," he said. The change of subject was so complete, it took her a moment to catch up. "I like her very much," she said. "She's extraordinary. She asked me to look after you." Pamila set her cup down. "She didn't need to do that. I can look after myself." "I know you can," he said. And the way he said it, level, without any trace of condescensions, meant he actually believed it. "She wasn't worried about your safety. She was worried about whether this house." He stopped, started again. "Whether you were being treated the way you should be." "I'm fine," she said. "You say that the way I say it," he said. She looked at him. He looked at her. And then Han Tae-jin smiled. Not the small, controlled quarter smile from corridors. The full thing. Open, unguarded, transforming. It changed his face so completely that for a second she was looking at the person underneath all the other people. The boy with the jar of crickets. The boy who'd read a book about the deep sea until it fell apart. Something moved in her chest without asking permission. "Go to bed, Pamila," he said, standing, recovering himself. "Good night, Mr. Han," she said. He paused at the kitchen door, didn't turn around. "Tae-jin," he said. Just the correction. Just the one word. And then he was gone. She sat in the warm kitchen for a long time after, holding her cup, listening to the city outside. 3 months later, Madame Han came for dinner. Not a formal occasion, just dinner. The kind she had been asking her son for, and that he had finally, without announcement, arranged. She arrived with white chrysanthemums from her own garden, and a sealed container of yukgaijang she had made that morning, which she handed to Mr. Park personally. He received it with an expression that moved through professional jealousy, and then landed, helplessly, on delight. The table was set simply. Round. 3 chairs. Because Madame Han had said, when Han Tae-jin told her it would be just the two of them, that she would prefer it if Pamila joined them. He had been quiet for a moment. Then he had said all right. When Mrs. Cho told Pamila she would be sitting at the table, not serving it. Pamila made her repeat it. At the table, Mrs. Cho said, in the tone of someone reporting unusual weather. She paused. Then, quietly, in a voice that had something softer underneath it. You have done well these months, Pamila. She turned and walked away before Pamila could respond. Pamila stood in the hallway for a moment. Then she went to put on her best clothes. The dinner was the warmest thing that had happened inside that cold glass house in a long time. Madame Han ran the table like she ran everything, with complete ease, and no need to announce it. She talked about a trip to Jeju Island 40 years ago. About the painting in the hallway that she had told her late husband was wrong for the house, and was still telling her son the same thing now. She asked Pamila questions about Nigeria and listened to the answers with the same complete attention she had shown in the parlor 3 months ago. Han Tae-jin argued with his mother about the painting. He ate his food, including her yukgaijang, with unconcealed pleasure. He asked her about the Jeju-do trip she had apparently never told him about in full. Pamila sat between them both and felt, for the first time since arriving in Korea, like she was somewhere she was wanted. Not useful, not employed. Wanted. She told Madame Han about her mother's New Year pepper stew. Thick and dark red, with stockfish and uziza leaves, the smell of it carrying all the way to the end of the street. Her hands moved as she talked, the way they always did when she was telling something real. She didn't think about stopping them. Han Tae-jin watched her hands. Madame Han asked 3 specific questions about the uziza leaves. The evening stretched long past what dinner usually lasted in that house. When Madame Han finally rose to leave, she held both of Pamila's hands in hers and said, low enough that it was only between them, you belong wherever you choose to be, child. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Pamila held on. Thank you, Madame Han, for everything. Thank you, the old woman said. For a Tuesday morning in a grocery store, after his mother's car had gone, and the kitchen staff had begun cleaning, and the house had settled back into its nighttime quiet, Pamila was in the corridor, returning the table flowers to the side cabinet, when Han Tae-jin appeared. He was holding a folded piece of paper. The ingredients, he said, for the stew you described. She took it and looked at it. It was a handwritten list. His handwriting, precise, careful. Every Nigerian ingredient she had mentioned at dinner. Beside each one, a note, possible Korean substitute. Or, order from Lagos, Minjun knows the route. Or, ask Jiyoung. She found Nigerian spices in Itaewon last year. Pamila looked at the list for a long time. You don't have to do this, she said. I want to, he said. Those words, her words, said back to her in his voice. She looked up. The coldness. The beautiful, controlled, impenetrable surface of Han Tae-jin was not there. In its place was something simpler and more honest. A man who had been underwater for a very long time and was, slowly, choosing to surface. The book, she said. The deep sea one. Your father's edition. They reprinted it last year. Same cover, same everything. You can order it. He went very still. How did you know to look that up? He said. You told me about it, she said. I remembered. He looked at her for a long time. Outside, Seoul carried on. Loud and bright and entirely indifferent. Traffic on distant roads. A plane crossing the sky. A million people living their million lives. None of them aware of this corridor. This moment, these 2 people. Good night, Pamila, he said. Good night, Tae-jin, she said. He turned, took 2 steps, stopped. Thank you, he said. Not to the wall, to her. For what? He was quiet for a moment. Just long enough. For not walking past, he said. And then he was gone. She stood in the corridor with the flowers in Watson-Assam and the list of ingredients in her hand. In the warm quiet of a house that was becoming, room by room and without ceremony, something it had never quite been before. 2 months later, a package arrived at the compound addressed to Han Tae-jin. He opened it alone in his 4th-floor office at the end of the day, when the house was quiet and the city outside had gone into its nighttime hum. Inside, wrapped in plain brown paper, was a book. The spine was new, but the cover was the same. He knew it the moment he saw it. The same deep blue illustration of an ocean cross-section. The same white lettering. The deep, the hidden wonders of our oceans. The same edition his father had given him at 12. Reprinted. Intact. He sat down. He held it in both hands and felt the weight of it. Then he opened to the first page. And Han Tae-jin. Feared, controlled, cold-faced Han Tae-jin, whose name people said carefully, and whose road they drove past without slowing down, sat in his office in the evening, quiet, and began to read about the creatures that live where no light reaches. He read for a long time. He did not stop smiling. And downstairs, in a small warm kitchen, Pamila Adeyemi stood at the stove and made pepper stew for the first time since leaving Lagos. The smell of it moved through the house like a conversation. Like a door opening, like something long held finally being set down. She stirred the pot slowly. She was smiling too. And that is where we leave them tonight. A maid who could not walk past. An old woman who did not forget. A man who had been underwater for a long time, finally choosing to surface. If this story moved you, and I think it did, hit that like button right now. It takes 1 second, and it tells me to keep making stories like this one. Subscribe if you are not already here, because there are more stories coming, and you do not want to miss them. And, in the comments, I want to know, was there ever a moment in your life when you could have walked past something and you didn't? Tell me below. I read every single one. Thank you for being here. I will see you in the next story.